Keir Starmer, I'm asking you to leave now, because otherwise I'll name you. I'm not having it, and I've warned you before. It's the same people.
No one inside the House of Commons believed what they were seeing. Not the MPs on the green benches, not the clerks at the table, not even the journalists watching from the gallery, because moments earlier, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom had lost control and in doing so shattered one of the most sacred conventions of British politics. It began as a routine but tense debate on immigration. The chamber was loud, restless, already charged with frustration. Nigel Farage rose to speak, calm and measured, delivering a pointed critique of Labour's border policy. No theatrics, no shouting. Just cold, deliberate words that cut straight through the noise. He accused the government of confusion, weakness and betrayal of public trust. He spoke of broken promises, uncontrolled crossings and communities paying the price. MPs murmured, cameras zoomed in, and then something snapped. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. If you care about what's really happening in British politics behind the headlines, beyond the spin, then please take just 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the Britain Daily. It's completely free and it helps us keep bringing you the hard-hitting stories that matter. Prime Minister Keir Starmer rose, not with a rebuttal, not with figures or policy, but with fury written across his face. His voice was sharp, strained, almost shaking. He didn't challenge Farage's argument. He attacked the man himself. He accused Farage of undermining the nation, of poisoning public debate, of betraying Britain. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The Speaker immediately intervened, calling for order. But Starmer didn't stop. His words grew louder, his tone more aggressive. MPs from both sides looked on in disbelief as the Prime Minister ignored parliamentary protocol entirely. Again, the Speaker warned him. Again, Starmer refused to back down. This was no longer debate. It was an emotional collapse unfolding live on the floor of Parliament. Then came the moment that will be replayed for years. The Speaker stood and invoked Standing Order 43, a rarely used rule reserved for serious disorder. The chamber fell silent. Security officers entered the Commons floor, and in a scene that defied modern political memory, the Prime Minister was escorted away from the dispatch box, physically removed. Not suspended, not adjourned. Removed. MPs sat frozen. Some stared at the floor, others whispered in disbelief. The authority of the office, centuries of tradition, evaporated in seconds. As the doors closed behind him, Westminster knew something irreversible had happened. Outside the chamber, word spread instantly. Phones buzzed. Clips hit social media within minutes. The footage went viral before Starmer even reached the corridor. And the damage wasn't just visual, it was symbolic. A Prime Minister unable to control himself, a leader silenced by the Speaker, a government exposed in its most fragile moment. Meanwhile, inside the Commons, Nigel Farage remained seated, expressionless. He hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't broken a rule, he hadn't needed to. The contrast was brutal. By the time the session resumed, the narrative had already escaped Westminster. Britain was watching. And the question forming in millions of minds was no longer about immigration policy. It was about leadership and whether the man just escorted out of Parliament could ever regain control of his party, his government or the country itself. What happened next was even more damaging than the moment itself. Within minutes, the footage exploded across social media. Not clips, not commentary, raw video. The Prime Minister being escorted from the House of Commons, a scene many viewers initially believed was fake. But it wasn't. Every major broadcaster confirmed it. And with confirmation came chaos. Outside Parliament, journalists flooded the courtyard. Cameras swung toward Nigel Farage as he emerged, calm and unhurried. No raised voice, no victory lap, just a brief statement that landed harder than any insult. This is not the behaviour of a man fit to lead a country. That was all he needed to say. Inside Downing Street, the atmosphere collapsed into panic. Senior aides scrambled to contain the damage, but there was no controlling a moment like this. Ministers stopped answering calls, press officers delayed statements, and as the silence stretched, it only amplified the sense of crisis. Then the leaks began. Sources close to the Prime Minister quietly admitted that tensions inside Labour had been building for weeks. Immigration, polling, internal divisions, pressure from both wings of the party. The Commons' outburst, they said, wasn't an isolated incident. It was the breaking point. Some aides reportedly questioned Starmer's emotional resilience under sustained pressure. Others raised concerns about judgment. By nightfall, those whispers reached Labour MPs and the response was brutal. Several backbenchers cancelled media appearances. Others demanded emergency meetings. A small number began openly discussing leadership alternatives, not publicly, but privately, urgently. Trust had fractured. Polling firms moved quickly. Overnight snap surveys showed a sharp drop in confidence, not just in the government, but in Starmer personally. Voters weren't debating policy anymore. They were questioning temperament, leadership, stability. Meanwhile, Farage didn't need to say another word. He allowed the footage to circulate untouched. The contrast between his composed presence and Starmer's meltdown became the story. Analysts replayed the clip frame by frame. Commentators asked the same question repeatedly. If this is how he reacts to criticism, how does he handle crisis? By morning, the pressure intensified. Reports emerged of resignations from advisory roles. Labour's internal messaging channels reportedly descended into confusion, with conflicting instructions and delayed responses. And still, no clear explanation, no apology, no justification, no reassurance, just silence. That silence proved devastating because in politics, silence after spectacle reads as guilt or worse, loss of control. Opposition parties seized the moment. Conservative figures spoke of a breakdown in authority. Reform UK supporters framed it as proof of elite fragility. Even neutral commentators began using language rarely associated with a sitting Prime Minister. Unravelling, isolated, cornered. By the end of the day, the question dominating Westminster had changed. It was no longer what happened in the chamber. It was what happens next. Because governments survive scandals, they survive criticism, they even survive poor polling. But a Prime Minister publicly losing control and being removed from the heart of British democracy is something else entirely. And Labour knew it. As night fell, emergency meetings were called. Numbers were counted. Names were quietly floated. Allies reconsidered their loyalty. The footage kept looping. The silence stretched on. And the pressure kept rising. What began as a heated exchange had become a full-blown leadership crisis. And by the time the sun rose again, one thing was clear. This was no longer about Nigel Farage. It was about whether Keir Starmer had just ended his own premiership. By the following morning, the crisis had hardened into something far more dangerous than embarrassment. It had become structural. Inside Labour headquarters, emergency meetings stretched into the early hours. Senior figures demanded explanations that never came. Allies who once defended the Prime Minister now avoided cameras entirely. The absence of a clear response wasn't just noticed, it was interpreted as weakness, as fear. As a leader no longer in control of events, reports emerged that several MPs had privately submitted letters of concern to party whips. Others quietly asked about the rules for triggering a leadership challenge. No announcements were made, but the movement beneath the surface was unmistakable. Labour wasn't just shaken, it was splintering. The public reaction only intensified the pressure. Phone-in shows were flooded. Social media sentiment turned sharply negative. Even voters sympathetic to Labour expressed unease, not with ideology, but with temperament. The same phrase appeared again and again. He doesn't look like a Prime Minister. Political analysts noted the symbolism was catastrophic. British politics is built on restraint, composure and ritual. A Prime Minister being escorted out of the Commons shattered that image instantly. Authority, once cracked in public, is nearly impossible to repair. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage remained almost silent, and that silence spoke volumes. He didn't attack, he didn't celebrate, he didn't escalate. He allowed the contrast to do the damage. Every replay of the footage reinforced the same narrative. One man composed under fire, the other overwhelmed by it. In modern politics, perception often outweighs policy, and this perception was brutal. By midweek, polling showed Labour losing ground across key demographics. Undecided voters drifted away. Core supporters expressed doubt. Confidence in leadership collapsed faster than party support itself, and a warning sign no strategist ignores. Behind closed doors, senior Labour figures began planning contingencies. Some argued Starmer could recover with time and discipline. Others believed the damage was irreversible, that the image of a Prime Minister losing control in Parliament would define him forever. History offered little comfort. British leaders have survived scandals, rebellions, even mass protests. But public humiliation at the heart of Parliament is different. It stains the office itself, and voters rarely forget moments that feel final. As days passed, the question evolved again. It was no longer, will Keir Starmer resign? But how long can Labour afford to wait? Because every hour of silence deepened the narrative. Every delayed response allowed opponents to frame the story. And every replay of that moment in the Commons reminded the country that something fundamental had broken. Not a policy, not a promise, but authority. This wasn't just a bad day for a Prime Minister, it was a warning shot for the entire political establishment. A reminder that power depends not just on numbers in Parliament, but on composure, credibility and trust. And once those are lost in public, they are almost impossible to reclaim. Westminster will move on, the news cycle always does, but this moment will linger. Because somewhere between the raised voice, the ignored speaker and the security officers stepping onto the Commons floor, a line was crossed, and British politics may never look quite the same again.